You probably each remember this example well from the day we worked on mega formulas. Here we have a payroll with several employees, and we created mega formulas to determine the state withholding tax over here, the 4979. That's quite large, as you recall. The mega formula looks something like this. Okay, but today we'd like to create a regular function to handle this instead. Before we do that, let's review the tax schedules down here. Remember, there's only two differences, whether they're single and married, and that was the base allowance is $10 for single, $16 if married, and on line 7, we subtract $500, or if they're married, $750. The rest is exactly the same. Also, note that when you get down to line 9, we take line 6 minus line 8. Well, 8 is just a combination of 7 and 8, so that's one way of figuring allowances. 6 is another way of doing it, so we can also use that to our advantage when we do our function. I'm going to F11. Here we have, you notice, two functions. The federal withholding, I've already programmed that in. That was using those tables the federal government supplied and works quite well. We also have the function state withholding stub put in here. I programmed in just the name of the function and then it ends. The inputs into this is the pay, and I said as double. That could just as well be currency. It doesn't make any difference really to the final results of this. And also then the results that we send back we can say will be currency. Then we also have the married or single status is a string and the number of dependents as an integer. Now notice if we go back here that we have dependents and they're still strings. We had to convert those in order to use them in our work down here, or it was very hard to deal with them. Here it won't make any difference because they're coming in as an integer, so Excel will try to convert those strings to an integer, and in this case it will do that just fine. We don't have to worry even though it was in a string format. So let's go ahead and get started. I like to indent in. We said first we need somewhere to put things. We need a spot in memory where we can keep our intermediate results. First of all, I'm going to make this smaller so that we can see the tables. So using the Utah Schedule 3, the first item we need is Utah taxable wages. Well, we have that. That's already one of the parameters being passed, pay. So I don't need to create a storage space for it. The function defined the name, and each of these arguments already have a place in memory where it keeps track of that. So 1 is fine, it's pay. 2, it says multiply line 1 by 0.05. Well, we do need to keep track of that somewhere, and so I'll put in dim line 2. We could say as currency or as double would work, or I can just leave it like it is and it will still work for us. Let's see now what we want to do. We want to take and make that equal to pay times 0.05. And I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to come over here out a ways and put a comment that represents line number 1 on tax table. That way we can refer to why we did that. Next, let's look at line 3, number of withholding allowances. Well, we already have that as well. That's this DEP up here, so I don't need to do anything there. Line 4, multiply line 3 by 5. Here we need somewhere to put it, and I'm just going to say, I'm going to call this one allowance 1. I'll just leave it as a variant for now, and I'll say allowance 1 equals, we said multiply line 3, the withholdings, so that's DEP, times 5. And that will be number 4. Okay, so now we've got through number 4. Number 5 and 6 say that we're going to add a base allowance to what we just did in number 4. But it depends on if they're single or married. So we'll need an if statement there. If what? MS equals single, then we're going to do something, else we'll do something if that's not true, if they're married, and end if. Okay, that looks pretty good, except what if they put a small s over here instead of a capital? Looks like these are capital. When we work in the worksheet, it doesn't matter whether they're capitalized or not when we do a condition statement, seeing if something's equal to s. But in Visual Basic, it does. So one thing I could do, though, is just transform whatever comes in to be a capital letter. So if they put in a small s, it wouldn't matter. I do this by encasing this in U case. And now it won't matter whether they put in a capital S or a small s. It will still recognize that they meant single. Now we need to say allowance 1 equals whatever we had before in allowance 1, plus, if they're single, it would be 10. And I'll put a comment that this represents number 5 and 6. Okay. That works if they're single. If they're married, it was 16, so I'm going to copy that and then come down here and paste that in, and we'll change this to 16. Earlier, we said that 7 and 8 instructions down here create that new type of allowance, so I better put in an allowance 2 here. Now for number 7, it says line 1 less $500. So allowance 2 equals line 1 was pay minus $500, and that is if they're single. And that's representing line 7. And I'll come down here and do the same. Line 7, but it's $750 if they're married. Now we've taken care of any differences in these schedules for if they're single or married. That was whether it was 10 or 16 or 500 or 750. So we'll just continue on outside of the if condition. You remind me that line 7, it says not less than 0. So we better write an if statement that will take care of that if allowance 2 is less than 0. Okay, so we'll set it to 0 if it's less than, otherwise we're okay, and that's part of rule number 7 here. Going to 8, multiply line 7 by 0.013. Okay. Times 0.013, and that'll be line 8. Well, we are moving right along through this logic. Let's look at line 9. It says line 6 less line 8 and not less than 0. So we probably need somewhere to store that. I probably could use allowance 1 or 2 or something else, but I think I'll create another allowance. And we'll say allowance 3 equals, it says line 6, so I look at line 6, that's allowance 1, minus line 8, which is allowance 2. And we'll put a comment that that's line 9. But we still have the not less than 0, so I better put that in. And that is also still part of 9. Now we come to line 10. It says withholding tax minus line 2 less line 9. So the withholding tax is the state withholding equals line 2, we have that named line 2, minus line 9, which is allowance 3. And again, it says, but not less than 0. And both of these should be line 10. So it looks like we're complete and ready to go. But do you recall the one problem I talked about when we were doing mega formulas, that it shows 1/3 of a cent on that first person? We better round out the partial pennies because that will add up over the year's time of all the paychecks and will be off when we report it to the federal government. So I want to put a round in there, so let's do that. So I'll round it to the nearest penny. Well, that's fine, and it works pretty well. Except, just so you're aware, this round is different than the round we used in the worksheet function round. This round, I believe, is a banker's rounding, where if it's 0.5, sometimes it goes up and down randomly. Whereas, on the worksheet round, if it's 0.5, it always rounds up. If we want to use that worksheet round, we can do that. We would just enter that here in front of the round and use the worksheet version. Okay, I think we're ready to go. Let's try it out. So I'll come over here somewhere and say equals state. Oh, you can see the state withholding. And so I'll tab and it'll pull that in, but it doesn't tell me what the parameters are. Remember that any user-defined function, UDF, doesn't have that available. To do that, Excel has developed code that will do it for each of their functions. And even then, I've seen when they've missed some. However, for a user-defined function, we can still use the insert function here, command, fx, and I can see that it's pay, ms, and DEP in that order. So pay, and then ms, and DEP. And we've got 49.79. We can copy that on down. Let me turn that into dollars and cents. Control Shift $, and all the amounts agree. It looks like we're in pretty good shape. So now we have a function that we can use to determine the state withholding, and also you saw there's one for the federal withholding. What is the advantage of a user-defined function over a mega formula that has a name? That's right. With a mega formula, married single always had to be in column B, dependents always in column C, and gross pay in column J. With a user-defined function, it doesn't matter where they're found. They can be anywhere, and I can just refer to the individual cells. Now, this was a fairly complex formula. I would suggest you take time and look at a lot of the other formulas that are available, either on the spreadsheets I gave you or from the book, and learn what the differences are and start trying to make some functions of your own. You'll be doing this in the homework.